Hello and welcome to another video lesson with Mr. Roman. Today we're going to be talking about the notes for section 3.2 in your geometry books. And today we're going to be talking about some theorems dealing with consecutive interior angles and alternate interior angles, alternate exterior angles, and so on and so forth. So here, let's start with this theorem. The consecutive interior angles theorem says if two parallel lines are cut by a transversal, then the pairs of consecutive interior angles are supplementary. Okay, so a big point here to look at is the lines that are being cut have to be parallel. Okay, so they're being cut by a transversal, and the consecutive interior angles are going to be supplementary. So let's take a look at the diagram here. If we look at this diagram, we are not told whether or not there are any parallel lines here. So we can't just assume that there are parallel lines between K and R. But if you see symbols like this, little arrows, those arrows indicate that those are parallel lines. So let's go ahead and leave those up. In this diagram, we can use the information given, mainly the 120 degrees here, to determine every other angle in the picture. So the way we would do that is this. Angle 2 here is going to be equal to 120 degrees because it's a vertical angle with this one here. So 120 and 120. Then we can say linear angles between 3 and 2, that enables angle 3 to be 60 degrees. And the same similar concept with angles 1 and 2. Angles 1 and 2 are linear, so this is going to be 60 degrees here. Then, what the consecutive interior angles theorem is saying is, since line K and line R are parallel, then we can say that consecutive interior angles, meaning angles 1 and 4, or angles 2 and 6, those two are going to add up to 180 degrees, or they'll be supplementary. So supplementary meaning two angles that add up to 180 degrees. So here, since I know that angle 1 plus 4 is going to be 180, I can say this: 60 plus angle 4 equals 180 degrees. And therefore, then I can say that angle 4 is 120 degrees. And then I could use a similar concept here with angles 2 and 6. So I could say angle 2 is 120 degrees plus angle 6, and that has to equal 180 degrees. And that means that angle 6 then is going to be 60 degrees for angle 6. And then using our linear angles and vertical angles, we could say that angle 5 is 60 degrees and angle 7 is 120 degrees. Next, let's talk about the corresponding angles postulate. So here, we're going to be talking about this postulate. And again, postulate is something that is not proven, but we accept it as true anyway. So here, if two parallel lines, so key there, have to have parallel lines, and they're cut by a transversal, then the corresponding angles are congruent. So let's take a look in the diagram. So in this picture, the corresponding angles would be 120 and 4. You could say that angles 6 and 3 are corresponding. You could also say that angles 5 and 1 are corresponding. And you could say angles 2 and 7 are corresponding. So the corresponding angles are congruent here with that theorem, which means that we can say this. 120 is equal to angle 4. We can say angle 3 is equal to angle 6. We can say angle 1 is equal to angle 5. And we can say angle 2 is congruent to angle 7. Okay, next we're going to talk about the alternate interior angles theorem. So again here, we have to have two parallel lines cut by a transversal, and then the alternate interior angles are congruent. So in this diagram, the alternate interior angles would be angles 1 and 6 or angles 4 and 2. Those are the alternate interior angles. And what we can say then is angle 1 is congruent to angle 6, or angle 2 is congruent to angle 4. So that's what the theorem there is saying. And lastly, the alternate exterior angles theorem. So again, we have to have two parallel lines cut by a transversal. Then the alternate exterior angles are congruent. So let's look at the diagram here. So the alternate exterior angles would be angles 7 and 120, or angles 5 and 3. So those are the alternate exterior angles. And what we can say then is this: 120 is equal to angle 7. Angle 3 is equal to angle 5. Now let's look at some practice problems for these theorems. In this drawing, we need to find what the angle measures are for angles A, B, and C. And there are a lot of different approaches we could use here, but the first approach you could use is saying that since angles 115 and angles A are vertical angles, then I can say that angle A is equal to 115 degrees. Then I could say by the consecutive interior angles theorem that angle A and this angle add up to 180 degrees, or they're supplementary. So then that makes this red angle 65 degrees. Okay. Then, by using linear angles, so linear angles here, I could say that angle B plus this 65 angle is going to be 180. So that means that angle B is 115 degrees. And again, with vertical angles, I could say that angles B and C are 115 degrees. Now, that's one strategy to use in this diagram. Another strategy might be that you can start off with the alternate exterior angles theorem. So here, angle 115 and angle C are alternate exterior angles. So we know that they're going to be congruent by that theorem. Okay. Then by vertical angles, you could say that angles B and C are congruent. So we know 115 there. And then by the alternate interior angles theorem, we could say angle B and angle A are congruent. So angle 115. Okay? So there's two different ways to solve a problem like that. And there are many others you could use as far as using linear angles, vertical angles, consecutive interior angles theorem, or alternate interior angles theorem, or alternate exterior angles theorem. It's important to note here on this last problem, I forgot to put this down, but these were parallel lines. So before I didn't have that marking on there. If you don't see the arrows, then you cannot assume that those are parallel lines, but I forgot to draw those on there. So for your homework assignment tonight, we have 3 problems, and you need to find the values of x and y in each diagram. So number 1 and number 2, again, find the values of x and y. And number 3, find the values of x and y. Have a nice evening, and see you tomorrow in class.